yet another angle and to my excuse me, rude and gross. Less about successful. What the hell? Here we go. Whew. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather and as always I'm reading with a vengeance and I hope you are too. How is everybody doing? I am doing a random video, and usually when I do a random video it's in the afternoon, and when I do a video in the afternoon I have a cocktail. Today I'm having a Recorderling Premium Swedish Hard Cider, pear flavored. I first had this when my husband and I visited Norway about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now. It's very sparkly, it's very clean tasting, it's very summery, and very few alcoholic beverages quench my thirst, but this one does it and it's delicious. I very rarely do tags anymore, and this isn't a tag, but as I've kind of honed in on the videos that I prefer to do, there are very few different types of videos that I do. I usually keep it up to my reading updates, new releases that I'm excited about. But one of the things that I want to do kind of on a regular basis is kind of a random video that you don't see very often, where I talk about maybe books that nobody else is talking about. And that's one of the things that inspired me to do this video. And I just think it would be kind of a cool little themed episode that I do where it's a random topic. I have a cocktail with you instead of coffee, and we do it in the afternoon. Although, you know, I don't know what time it is when you're watching this, but it's the afternoon for me. This will be the first of maybe a series of random topic videos that I do. We'll see how it goes. So this one I got the idea for on Instagram, and it might be one of my very few Instagram friends, Kelly of Dear Books I Love You. So if you're watching, thank you, Kelly, and hello. She posted the very first 10 books that she added to her Goodreads account. And I thought, interesting. And of course, immediately I went to my Goodreads account where you can list all the books that you have in on your page there and put them in different order based on a number of different topics. And in this case, the date that you just added them to your list of books. And so I went and looked, and the first 10 books I ever added on Goodreads, I thought were really interesting because most of them are pretty pivotal books in kind of my reading life. They've had a certain effect on me long term. And I thought, you know what? I think that would be a really good idea for a video to share with you guys. If you are watching this and it seems like something that you would want to do, I highly encourage you to do it and tag me so I can watch your video if you make that. I know Goodreads has kind of a dark cloud over it now that it's owned by, you know, the beast starting with A. And I have tried to switch over to other platforms. I do use Storygraph. I do use another one. I can't even remember the name of it, but I really like how they have a book calendar. I think, what is it called? So I use 3 different platforms, but my go-to, the one that I've been using for so long, is Goodreads. I joined Goodreads in 2009, which was 2 years after it was launched, but it was still 2 years before it got really, really popular, and 4 years before it was acquired by that other big company. And I remember when I first got on Goodreads, and it was very easily accessible. It was very user-friendly. I liked the aesthetic of it. My eye just really gets the layout of Goodreads. I love the organization of it. I love the homepage. I like the menu item of my books and how that's broken down into, you know, want to read, have read, and just all the books all together. And then you could set up your own bookshelves based on whatever topic you want to. I know I have my women's prize for fiction lists, and I just like the way it's set up, and I've tried to make that transition. and I can't bring myself to let go of Goodreads, and I could probably go on and on about this subject, but there you go. Anyways, the first 10 books that I added. By 2009, I'd been reading for a good 35 years. I turned 40 in 2009. So I had a huge library of books in my head that I had already read that I wanted to put on my account. But not only could I not put them in the order that I read them, I couldn't even really put them, a date of when I read them. So I was just randomly throwing books on there as they came to mind. But the main thing is that these books had an effect on me long term. That's the other reason why I thought this would be an interesting video. The very first book that I added to my Goodreads account when I joined in the ancient time of 2009 was The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. This, of course, was Mitch Albom's follow-up to his very popular Tuesdays with Morrie. And this book came out in 2003, so it was not long after 9/11. I remember everybody was talking about this book when it came out because this was during a time where people were kind of just searching for any kind of meaning in their lives. And this one follows Eddie, who is a wounded war veteran who is in the later stages of life. He believes that he's led a meaningless life. He works at an amusement park as a ride mechanic. And one day, while saving the life of a child on one of the amusement park rides, he gets into an accident and he dies. He wakes up in the afterlife and he discovers that heaven is not a place. And Eddie meets 5 people, some of them people that he knows, some of them are strangers, but these are 5 people who Eddie has had an effect, a significant, meaningful effect on their lives. And so this book really kind of answers that age-old question of why am I here? What am I doing here? What is my purpose? I loved this book. Many people have loved this book. And yeah, I think it's a great first book to add to my online digital book library. The next book I added was definitely not the first book I read by this author. I don't think. Nope, it wasn't. So the next book I added to my Goodreads account was 19 Minutes by Jodi Picoult. The very first book I read by Jodi Picoult was My Sister's Keeper. Of course, that was super popular when that first came out. 19 Minutes didn't make as much of a splash. I don't hear a whole lot of people talking about 19 Minutes, but it's one of my favorites by Jodi Picoult. And I want to say that even though I loved My Sister's Keeper, I think this book really got me hooked on her as an author, and she became kind of an auto-buy author. Picoult has an unquestionable knack for writing about and exploring emotionally triggering, controversial topics. And this one is no different. This one is about a school shooting, but it is less about the actual act of violence and more about the events leading up to it, the behavior of different people, different characters leading up to it, the different things people said to other certain people that led up to the act of violence. So it's a really, really interesting, thorough look into something like a school shooting, whereas when we hear about it on the news, the media is always, who did this and why did this person do it? And instead of, what Jodi Picoult does, and she looks at everything that led to this particular act. Excellent exploration of this particular topic. And as per usual with Jodi Picoult, there is a juicy twist that turns everything that you have just read on its head. Incredibly compelling book. The third book that I added to my account, oh my gosh, Where the Heart Is by Billy Letts. So this came onto my radar because it was on the Oprah's book club list. And at the time, I remember I was following Oprah like it was my job. I watched her show, I subscribed to her magazine, And of course, I followed her book club. This wasn't the first book on her book club. I think by the time this one hit, she'd been doing it for a number of years, but this was the first one that got me interested in her book club. I loved this book. And I also remember this particular book got me out of a really long reading slump. And it wasn't just a reading slump that we get into as avid readers every once in a while. This was one of those long phases of my life that I hadn't been reading just because of life or whatever. And I just wasn't reading a lot during that time. This one popped up and I read it, and it immediately made me want to just keep reading. This one follows 17-year-old Nova Lee. She's 7 months pregnant, and while driving across country with her no-good boyfriend, he abandons her at a Walmart in the middle of nowhere, I believe in Oklahoma. And she becomes kind of a local celebrity because she has her baby at the Walmart. And in doing this, she meets a bunch of people. This is about found family, and she finds her path in life. And it's just very, very heartwarming and lovely. They made a movie about it, and there were a couple of things about the movie that I didn't really care for, but they did an okay job. And I thought Natalie Portman as Nova Lee was perfect. This next one is kind of strange as far as it being a part of this list. It doesn't really fit with all the other ones. It is the only one on here. Nope, there's one of two that just didn't really work for me. I got a very low rating as far as giving Goodreads stars. This one is Drowning Ruth by Christina Schwartz. I want to say this was one of the first 10 of books added onto my list when I joined Goodreads, just because it was a fairly recent read. This one was also on Oprah's book club list. I remember zero about this book other than that I was completely bored by it. It follows a woman, Matilda, I think is her name, who was terribly affected by World War I, and she goes to live with her sister and her sister's daughter, Ruth. And then her sister mysteriously dies, and Matilda kind of takes over raising Ruth and maintaining the farm because her sister's husband is off in the war as well. And then the husband comes back and finds the situation. And then I guess it goes forward in time to where Ruth is an adult. She's still living with Matilda. And as she's kind of, asking questions about what happened with her mom and all these things, and secrets start to come out about what really happened. And that's only after reading the synopsis. I really don't remember much other than it just wasn't very compelling for me. The fifth book that I added to my Goodreads list was A Widow for 1 Year by John Irving. Now, this is the only other book that didn't work for me on this list. However, it was somewhat pivotal because this was the first John Irving book that I started and completed. I probably should have DNF'd it. I tried to read A Prayer for Owen Meany, which everybody who's read it loved it. And I tried to read it because it was a book club pick for the book club that I was in at the time. And it was one of the very first DNFs I've ever done. And it was just very strange because everybody in my book club loved it, and it's got a high rating. But then I read A Widow for 1 Year, and I can't remember a thing about it other than it just didn't work for me. I gave it a really low rating on Goodreads. And I think what I discovered from this is that his writing style just doesn't work for me. He writes kind of quirky characters, I think, and quirky goings on. And what's strange is I love all the movies that are adapted from his books. I love The World According to Garp. I loved The Cider House Rules. So I don't know, just his writing style, I think, is not for me. Yeah, A Widow for 1 Year follows another character named Ruth. It follows her in 3 different timelines throughout her life. Yeah, that's all I have for you. I don't really remember, and the synopsis doesn't really help me out much. So what can you do? This next one is an interesting one because a lot has happened since it came out, since I read it, and up until a few years in recent past. Book number 6 that I added to my Goodreads list is Lucky by Alice Sebold. So many of you probably already know kind of the backstory to this book. Lucky came out way before The Lovely Bones did. I don't remember how it came onto my radar, but this is Alice Sebold's memoir, and she talks specifically in this memoir about when she was sexually assaulted as a freshman in college, and I think she went to Syracuse. I remember really enjoying her memoir. I liked her writing style. I liked how she was completely open about what happened to her. I don't remember specific details, but here's what's interesting about this memoir. So she identified a man, and he was tried and convicted and spent, I want to say, 16 years in prison. And in 2016-ish, I think there was a group of people who wanted to make a series for TV based on her memoir. And as they were doing their due investigation, they found inconsistencies. And through more and more investigation, I don't know the specific thing that led the powers that be bring it back to court, but the man that she identified and was convicted and spent years and years and years in prison was found to be innocent. She has apologized for that. So much has happened in the past 2 decades, research and studying memory and how it is not as accurate as we once thought it to be. So eyewitness accounts aren't as solid as evidence as it used to be. I don't think there was any malice as far as identifying this man. I believe that she believed that this was the right man who assaulted her. And it's just tragic when something like this happens. What I also found was interesting is that the publisher of this book stopped distributing her memoir because of this whole thing that happened. I think rightfully so. I don't think, obviously we don't want to go out and burn books or anything. I'm not a fan of censorship in any way, but I can kind of get behind not wanting to publish something that is supposed to be true events and has since been discovered that they're not true events. I think that's different than just not believe. Well, I don't want to go down a whole censorship rabbit hole, but you understand what I'm saying. Anyways, really interesting circumstances surrounding this book. Yeah, definitely an interesting book to have on my first 10. Book number 7 added to my Goodreads list is The Double Bind by Chris Bajalian. This was definitely not my first book that I read by this author. And I'm pretty sure I picked this one up because I loved The Midwives so much. I don't remember a whole lot about this book other than I really enjoyed it. But what's interesting is in preparation for this video, I went back and looked at the reviews for this book, and they are scathing. It didn't just not work for them. They hated it, said it was awful. And I remember really liking it. This one follows a young woman. She's a sophomore in college, and she also is sexually assaulted. And in, I think, part of her recovery, she goes and I think she volunteers at a homeless shelter, and she befriends an older man there. Not long after befriending him, he dies. And she finds out that he was a successful photographer in his heyday. And when looking through his portfolio of all these beautiful photographs that she finds, she kind of learns more about him and that he was a successful person at one point in his life before everything just kind of turned to crap. And he ended his life in a homeless shelter. This one explores mental illness because I think there is a twist in this book where things are not quite what they seem as you're reading the book. But there's also this thing, the author really handled homelessness differently. He explored homelessness as not this adverse thing that happens to other people. He really explored this thing that can happen to really anybody. In a stroke of luck, in circumstances beyond our control. And he really just handled it with the respect and dignity I think it deserves. Whereas, up until reading this book, homelessness had always been mentioned as something that happened to people because of the bad choices they made or something that they chose for themselves. And this one kind of flipped that mentality on its head for me. I think this book is worthy of people's praise because of that. Oh, also, fun fact about this one, the photographer in this book, while he's not a real person, he's based on a real person. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Book number 8 added to my Goodreads list of books was Pretty in Plaid by Jen Lancaster. So I've read several by this author. Jen Lancaster she writes memoirs, like humorous memoir type of books. Think of like Samantha Irby, but think really, really white. Hilarious books. I read her first one, which was Bitter is the New Black. And she talks unapologetically about her battle with her weight, about her obsession with her looks and how she dresses, her relationship with her husband, I believe is Fletch, I think his name, and just strange antics that happen to her doing the very mundane things like grocery shopping or driving. Hilarious. Bitter is the New Black. I would recommend to anybody if you just need a good laugh about real stuff. This one's pretty funny too. I enjoyed it. Not quite as much as Bitter is the New Black, but I'm glad I read it. It was pretty funny. This one follows her antics, after she becomes super successful from her first book. The rabbit hole that she fell down as far as what happens to regular people when they get a ton of money and a ton of success really fast. And she's, again, unapologetic about it, makes no excuses for what happens to her. And it is just laugh out loud funny. Book number 9 on my Goodreads list is an iconic one for me. And it certainly wasn't my first book by this author, but it was the scariest at that time. And that is Stephen King's It. I remember vividly, I read this in the early aughts. So I was in my early 30s. I was married to my first husband. We were visiting his parents during the summer. I want to say it was 4th of July weekend. And I was reading this at night before bedtime. My husband was asleep next to me in bed, so he was with me. I wasn't alone. The lights were on, and I was terrified. Terrified. I didn't want to turn the lights off to go to sleep. Terrified, but I loved it. It was the best kind of terrified. I love the way Stephen King writes. You've heard me say this before. He just writes scary really well. He writes coming of age really well. He writes supernatural really well. He writes characters and dialogue really well. And this book has all of those things. I wouldn't say it is my favorite Stephen King book, but it definitely scared me the most. I want to say to date. The 10th book that I added to my Goodreads list is probably the most life-changing, really. And that is Skinny Bitch by Rory Friedman and Kim Barnowen. This is the book that I read that after reading a particular chapter, I became a vegetarian, and that was almost 20 years ago. Let me just read you the subtitle. A no-nonsense, tough love guide for savvy girls who want to stop eating crap and start looking fabulous. So it's kind of a self-help, healthy eating book, but tongue-in-cheek. If memory serves, the two authors, one of them is a former model and the other one is a former modeling agent. And they really kind of are proponents of veganism in this book. And they tell you about, how bad sugar is for you, how bad caffeine is for you, and a whole bunch of other stuff. You kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, pun intended. There's a lot of really interesting information in this book, but it's also very, like I said, tongue-in-cheek. There's a lot of humor in this book as well. You know what? Hold on a second. I wanted to go ahead and get it and show you that this is one of the books that I keep in my library. It's not that I refer to it all the time, but becoming a vegetarian was kind of a big deal. It was a big change in my life, and it was a change that has lasted and will continue to last the rest of my life. It started off as a kind of a personal choice, somewhat politically. There's a chapter in here that describes what happens in chicken houses and slaughterhouses. And even before reading that chapter and being a meat eater, I intellectually knew that, meat doesn't come from, the cellophane wrapped packages in the store. I knew where it come from. I knew what, happens to animals before they end up on my plate. But this was really kind of a very graphic, descriptive explanation and kind of a slap in the face of this is what happens, and is tasting something good worth these terrible things that happen to these animals. And so it flipped a switch in me. I mean, I had to put the book down. I remember like it was yesterday. I had to put the book down because I'm sobbing my eyes out, and it flipped a switch and I never touched meat again. So yeah, this was very life-changing. There's a lot of other informational stuff in here, nutrition-wise, that I think is really interesting. I would recommend it. Just beware of, I want to say it's chapter 6. I think it's called You Are What You Eat. Beware of that chapter because it'll wreck you. But it wrecked me for the better. So anyways, pretty pivotal book for me. Absolutely makes sense that it is one of the first 10 books that was added to my Goodreads list. So that is it. Those are the first 10 books that I ever added to my Goodreads list. Have you read any of these books? Have you even heard of any of these books? Did you add any of them to your TBR because of what I said about them? I hope so. Is this going to inspire you to look back to see what your first 10 books were on your Goodreads list? If you are so inclined, I would love to hear what they are. Please let me know in the comments, or you can just say hi. I'd love to hear from you guys. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.